My parents bought my sister a house and expected me to pay the mortgage. I refused and they sued me, claiming I promised to help. In court, one simple question exposed everything they tried to hide. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk. Mom's voice sounded bright, almost giddy, as she announced they'd finally found the perfect house for Charlotte and Eric. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a backyard big enough for Sophie and Dylan to run around in. She described the granite countertops and the finished basement like she was reading from a real estate listing. I congratulated her, assuming they'd helped with a down payment or co-signed the loan. Charlotte had always struggled with money management, bouncing between part-time jobs and blaming her circumstances on having 2 young kids. Eric worked construction when the weather permitted, which meant winters were lean. Still, I figured this was their chance to finally build some stability. Mom kept talking about closing costs and inspection fees. The numbers seemed high, but I stayed focused on my computer screen, only half listening. Then she said something that made my fingers freeze on the keyboard. "We'll need you to cover the mortgage payments until they get on their feet." I asked her to repeat that. She laughed, acting like I made a joke. "Well, you've saved enough over the years. It's time you help family." The casual assumption in her voice hit me harder than the actual request. I'd spent 15 years building my career in financial consulting, living in a modest apartment, driving a 10-year-old sedan, and skipping vacations to pad my retirement accounts. Every promotion came from working weekends and taking on projects nobody else wanted. My savings represented sacrifice, not some pile of money I'd stumbled into. I told her I couldn't do that. The line went silent for several seconds. "Can't or won't?" Dad's voice came through instead. He must have been listening on another phone. I explained that my financial planning didn't include supporting another household. Charlotte and Eric needed to find something within their actual budget. This house sounded beyond their means, which made the whole situation a setup for failure. Dad's tone shifted from surprise to cold. He reminded me about all the times they'd helped me through college, how they'd paid for my textbooks and covered my car insurance until I was 23. Family meant supporting each other, he said. Charlotte needed this more than I needed another zero in my bank account. The guilt settled into my chest, heavy and familiar. I'd heard variations of this speech my whole life. Charlotte was the one who needed extra help with homework, who got extensions on curfew because she struggled with responsibility, who received a new car when she totaled hers junior year because mistakes happen. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't require much attention, the one who figured things out independently. I held firm. The answer was no. Mom got back on the line, her voice shaking. She called me selfish, said she didn't raise me to turn my back on family. Dad added that they'd already signed the paperwork, already committed to the purchase. They'd used their retirement savings for the down payment because they believed it'd step up. My stomach dropped. They'd made a 6-figure financial decision based on an assumption without even asking me first. I wanted to scream, but I kept my voice level. I told them this was their choice to undo, not my responsibility to fix. The following week became a nightmare of constant contact. Every family gathering I'd normally attend turned into an intervention. Sunday dinner invitations were actually ambushes where relatives cornered me about my decision. Uncle Gerald showed up at my apartment unannounced, saying he'd always thought of me as the smart one and couldn't understand why I was being so stubborn. I tried explaining my position rationally. Charlotte and Eric's combined income was roughly $48,000 annually. The mortgage payment alone would be $3,200 monthly, not including property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance. They were looking at housing costs that consumed nearly their entire income. Even with my help, the situation was unsustainable. Nobody wanted to hear the math. They wanted to hear me say yes. Grandma Florence called from Florida, her voice frail and disappointed. She'd always bragged about having such a successful granddaughter. Now she wondered if success had changed me into someone she didn't recognize. The guilt hit differently coming from her. She'd slipped me $20 bills throughout my childhood, telling me to save it for college. Those small gifts had mattered. I visited her the following month, flying down to explain everything in person. She listened while we sat on her porch, the Atlantic breeze carrying the scent of salt water. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Your parents made a mistake," she finally said. "A big one, but families forgive mistakes." I asked if that applied to my mistake, too, or just theirs. She didn't have an answer. Charlotte started posting on social media about the stress of potentially losing their dream home. She never mentioned me directly, but the implications were clear. Friends who knew our situation filled the comments with supportive messages and prayers. A few asked what had happened to her sister, whether I'd offered to help. Eric's father reached out separately, man to man, as he put it. We met for coffee at a diner halfway between our towns. Mr. Thompson was a retired electrician, straightforward and practical. He admitted Eric wasn't great with money, but insisted the boy worked hard when work was available. This house could give his grandchildren stability they'd never had. I asked if he'd considered helping with the mortgage himself. He looked down at his coffee cup, stirring it slowly. His pension barely covered his own expenses. He'd love to help, but couldn't afford it. "So, you understand my position, then?" I said. He met my eyes across the table. "I understand you got more than I do. That comes with responsibility." The assumption that my money created an obligation to everyone else was exhausting. I'd worked 80-hour weeks for years to build my savings. I'd eaten ramen dinners and skipped social events to maximize my 401k contributions. Every dollar represented a choice I'd made, a sacrifice I'd accepted. Charlotte had made different choices. She'd dropped out of community college after one semester, saying it wasn't for her. She'd worked retail jobs that she'd quit when managers annoyed her. She'd gotten pregnant with Sophie at 22, which I'd supported completely, but she'd also refused to consider how that would impact her career trajectory. I wasn't judging her life choices. I was simply refusing to fund the consequences of them. The pressure intensified as the closing date approached. Mom sent daily texts with updates. They'd hired movers. Charlotte had picked out paint colors for the kids' rooms. Sophie had told her entire third grade class about the backyard with the swing set. Each message was designed to increase my guilt, to make me feel responsible for disappointing a 9-year-old child. It worked. I felt terrible, but feeling terrible didn't change the fundamental problem. I consulted a financial advisor, laying out the entire situation. If I agreed to pay the mortgage, what would that do to my retirement planning? He ran the numbers, factoring in 30 years of $3,200 monthly payments, plus probable increases in property taxes and insurance. The total came to well over $1 million in today's money. Accounting for inflation and lost investment opportunity, I'd be sacrificing roughly $2 million from my retirement fund. I'd need to work an additional 15 years to recover that loss. He asked the obvious question. Would Charlotte and Eric ever be in a position to take over the payments?